Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Hello and welcome to Not Just Ads, the Creator Economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Klein. Dave is a founder of Management Accelerator, an ex-Bridgewater leader and a creator of Become the Leader You'd Follow. He's over 125,000 followers. He's a top voice on LinkedIn and over 100,000, I believe, close to thereabouts on Twitter as well, or X as it's known now. And he's built leadership systems that translate into real authority and influence both on X and on LinkedIn. And I believe he's also an avid Arsenal fan. I'm not 100% sure about that, but maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you've got it. I always worried about saying avid Arsenal fan, as my daughter's a big soccer player and we were watching EPL, I guess now 4 or 5 years ago, and just watching in general. I'm like, we really should just adopt a team. It would be more fun if we had somebody. Man City plays a beautiful football, but it's like kind of, as a Yankee fan, it's kind of like me opting into being, a fan of the best team. And Arsenal was young and fun, and we had just seen the sort of that documentary. I'm blanking on the name, but sort of the behind the scenes look with Arteta and everybody. And so we were like, let's go Arsenal. Like, why not? But little did we know we'd be long suffering, years and years without silverware. So hopefully they put it together for us this year.
We have, I've a couple of friends that are big Arsenal fans. They had a really memorable night here in May when they beat Real Madrid.
Oh my goodness.
That was a special night. There was a lot of sad faces in Real Madrid or in Madrid, but a lot of happy Arsenal fans.
Sure.
Yeah. Dave, it's great. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Great. So maybe we'll kick it off. I know that you've spent nearly a decade at Bridgewater. Just share some of the kind of management philosophies that you kind of take, that kind of you feel that's kind of shaped your career to date.
Yeah, I spent about 10 years there, and I had 10 years at Moody's before that in consulting, and definitely shaped tremendously by that time at Bridgewater. And I would say, not every aspect of that idiosyncratic culture, I think, is broadly applicable. But the idea of being very astute about what different people are like, like really having a high fidelity picture of strengths and weaknesses, and then how they might combine on a team to produce the best result. And sometimes you can put them together and get 1 + 1 equaling 3. And other times you can put them together and get 1 + 1 equaling 1/2. So that idea of that high fidelity picture is a big piece. I was very skeptical and now a convert on this idea of radical transparency. That just, honestly, it's a lot easier to operate when everybody knows everything. And that if if I have feedback for someone on my team, just sort of giving it in a very fast, small, quick twitch way, versus a lot of companies will accumulate this point of view on people and then surprise them once a year during performance reviews. And that's not really the way you get the most out of people. So and I think that probably the third most profound thing that I developed is this idea of systems, right? That we're all, motivation is waning and it can be hard to be disciplined, but if we can build systems, using other people's strengths, using computers, using process steps that are repeatable, we can create outcomes that are sustainable over time without always relying on someone showing up as a hero. So I think those are sort of 3 big pillars that show up throughout what we teach.
Yeah, I was listening recently as well. I heard you speaking with somebody about during your time in Bridgewater and how you were notified that you would be reporting to Ray Dalio directly. Maybe you could just share that was and your learnings.
Yeah, when I had started at Bridgewater, Ray had just recently announced that he was beginning his transition plan out. And so I sort of thought I had missed my window. And maybe 5 or 6 years in, he felt like he needed to reinsert himself as the CEO, but he didn't have a team. And so he sent an email to 12 or 15 people, and I was one of them. And I'd only met Ray once or twice. It wasn't like I had sort of become sort of a trusted advisor. And I honestly thought we used to do a lot of security tests. And so I thought it was a phishing test. I went to my boss and I'm like, I'm not going to fail this test because this is a joke, right? He spun around his monitor to be like, well, if it's a joke, then it's on both of us because he had it as well. And I'm like, no, but it's a joke, right? And he's like, no, I think he's serious. Because it basically said, you have I'm stepping back into CEO. I need a team. You've been requested to join. You have 3 weeks to get out of your current job. See you May 1st. And the whole idea was to help him create governance so that he could pull away, so that he could have CEOs running the company. He could have a board to govern and oversee that and sort of check on the quality of management. And it was a wild ride. I think it was very interesting to sort of be up close and sort of watch the person who had written the book and sort of like the principles and that operating system actually applying it in real time. I think there's a few tactics that are in the book that you then see in real life, and you're like, oh, I now see the power of that. It didn't like jump off the page the way it did. And one of them is this idea of we have a tendency, I think, as people to rationalize and justify, and we use the gray as our hiding place. And so he would often force people to synthesize first. Like, it's either good or it's bad. This is a big deal or it's a small deal. Because everyone, if you listen, they jump into the, well, in certain circumstances, it's kind of, sort of, maybe. And he was like, no. Let's start with like, which one is it? Is it good or is it bad? And you realize that really does force you to take a stand. Like, are we on this side or are we on this side? Now we can talk about the gray. Like, well, how good is it? And what are the things that might make it better, et cetera? But it really forces clarity. It forces discipline and thinking. And that was a huge benefit. I think I see and feel some of that in my writing, of where before I might have been wishy-washy and equivocating, and now I'm like, this is good, or this is a bad thing. And now let me tell you the story beneath it.
Well, about the dot collector, I know that it's the TEDx video has seen millions of views and so on, but for some people that's unaware of, everyone is aware of Ray Dalio's Principles book, but maybe you could just share a little bit about the dot collector and like how that works in a likely thing in the business when you were there.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk to a lot of the leaders we work with about is this idea of sort of amplifying your culture with systems that make those behaviors common, right? And so one of the Bridgewater tenets was this idea of radical transparency, this idea that you should say what's on your mind, that if we put the best ideas out and use data and logic to address them, we can get to a place of the best answers. And that was true of markets, but it was also, the thinking was it was true of people, that if you're surrounded by really smart people and they're sharing observations about you in terms of what you're good at, what you're not good at, you could take that data and through logic, build a picture of people and build a picture that in theory would be more unbiased than we might hold of ourselves. And so what you have to imagine is that everyone had an iPad, and on that iPad was an interface where, I could give Marcus real-time feedback. That feedback would flow into a public Twitter feed of Marcus's feedback. So everybody could see, is Marcus having a good day? Was Marcus having a bad day? Is Marcus excellent at synthesizing? Or is Marcus not at all creative? All these types of things. And then it would accumulate up into what we call the baseball card. So I believe I was somewhere in the range of like 11,500 observations of my performance over the 5 or 6 years we had that rolled up into that baseball card. So, people would come from other companies, other high performing companies. We had, plenty of people I interviewed from McKinsey who'd say like, I love tough feedback. And you'd ask them about like the toughest feedback they got. And they would talk about, well, at the end of a project, we debrief for 15 minutes. And, this person told me I could be a little bit more business savvy. And I'm like, I got 34 pieces of feedback yesterday. And it wasn't from like the partner, it was from a 22-year-old who graduated from university last week. So if you like tough feedback, get ready for a 100x increase in the volume.
Yeah. Do you think with that then as well, were there any limitations with the dot collector? It seems very efficient and it's you're getting honest feedback loops straight away. So obviously you can action based on feedback. But from your time there, do you think that there's any limitations or any drawbacks from a dot collector?
Yeah, I think it's like most things. You're going to be able to, you're either going to find people who will game it, like it's a voting tool, right? We see ratings on Amazon all the time being gamed by either over-indexing with popular reviews or people who are trying to undercut competitors. And if you don't have some reasonable checks and balances, it can certainly spiral out of control that way. I think we had adoption issues. Like some people were prolific dotters and other ones were not. Requiring quotas is like not necessarily the recipe for high fidelity feedback. If I tell you, hey, Marcus, you got to do 20 dots a day, are those really good business moving high quality feedback, or are you just going to check the box? And so I do think there's some tough second order consequences. The theory, I think that when used well without quotas, et cetera, that we want our leaders and we want our teams to be able to give feedback on a real-time basis and be able to put that together with logic in a way that doesn't sort of like, when you do performance reviews, they tend to be very recency biased. It's like, what'd you do last week?
Yeah.
As opposed to all year. One thing we didn't have, which I think would be really interesting now, is AI. So, we were using you're using very analytical ways of looking at that data versus now I wonder, could I be getting a report at the end of the week and saying like, hey, Dave, these were all your dots for the week. It seems like these were places you were doing great. Here's some suggestions of where you could improve. Looking ahead to your calendar next week, you might want to think about preparing for this one differently. It would just be like a very helpful realization of that idea of a coach as opposed to just a critique. Like we're getting lots of critiques without the coaching. That might close the loop in a way that I think makes it more powerful. And there's a phenomenon I'm seeing in a lot of people, but I see it in my kids, which is they will take critique from ChatGPT far more easily than they'll take critique from me.
Yeah.
There's something about the robot being dispassionate that they're like, oh, okay, I could listen to that. And I'm like, I've just been saying that. That's literally the thing I've been saying. Like, but I'm loaded. I have all the baggage and the emotion and what am I trying to manipulate versus ChatGPT is not trying to manipulate them, at least not that they're aware of.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'd love to talk to you a bit as well in terms of leadership systems. You mentioned I think it was like a phrase about kind of moving from intuition to intention in leadership. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about like anyone that's positioning into a new role. What are like kind of key tips that you would give somebody, say like, I don't know, somebody that's going in from like even a manager to a director or director to the board? What should they look at from people that you work with? But like, are there any kind of frameworks or maybe not even frameworks, but just practical kind of tips that they should be conscious of that can have impact, that can move the needle, but that are actually very, very small actions really?
Well, the arc of, I've written and we've actually just created a program that we're going to release in a couple of weeks. So your timing's excellent on how do you enter your first 100 days? Because I think a lot of times people show up and they're like, oh, the company will onboard me, they'll guide me through this process. They tend to take a very passive role. And what I've seen over time is that by and large, companies don't do a very good job onboarding you. And so the people who really end up thriving tend to onboard themselves. You can supercharge that if you onboard yourself in a way that has like an arc to the plan that you bring everyone along with, including your boss, your board, et cetera. The general arc we talk about is a small period of time to understand, a small period of time to synthesize, and then ultimately a long period of time to execute. But a lot of times I think people rush through the first one, which is, especially if you're new to a company or you're new to a division or a team, like you have to go understand the history, understand the cultural norms, understand the projects that are important and on track, understand the projects that are important and off track, understand the things that people have always done this way, but actually makes no sense anymore. And can you gather that up and get all the data in perspective? And if you do it in a smart way, you can also start building trust with the constituents around you, right? You can start to, if you let them feel heard, they'll start to buy into what it is you're going to build, which then sets you up to have this big pile of information for the synthesized phase, which again, big from small, important from unimportant. And I think that's where you start to hunt for both quick wins, like what are the small things you can do to really change the environment for your team? Or what's the one thing that people haven't been able to ask about, but you can use your newness to question? What's the win for your boss that is the reason your predecessor is no longer there? And in the synthesis, you start to build that bigger plan. Like what's the real transformative work we're going to do? What are sort of the 2x, 5x, 10x gains we're going to get? What's the stuff we're going to kill? Like what's the stuff that is no longer useful? And that's what we're going to use to create the capacity for going forward. And then the execution becomes like delivering those quick wins, showing progress, setting up your cadence, your rhythm of how you're going to operate that team, et cetera. So I think, again, if you're going in for just 80-20, what's my lightest work? Like spend a little time to gather that info, be clear in synthesizing and be a bit courageous. You can use your newness to defend that and then deliver fast.
Yeah. No, it seems, it makes a lot of sense. And it's quite practical. Like sometimes people struggle with going through those steps and doing it effectively in terms of the environment of the company and everything like that as well, which I guess every company is different too.
Well, and they were hired for their expertise typically, but they don't have the context to put it into. And so they
Yeah.
just start pattern matching off things that have happened to them in the past. And if they're lucky, it lines up, but sometimes it doesn't. And so again, I'm not encouraging people to spend a quarter, figuring out like all the
Yeah.
data, but a lot of times they come in and they just want to start making changes, and they want
Yeah.
to make the org the way it was, and they want to start. The person before me said this person's not good, I should fire them, and I'm like, just
Yeah.
give yourself a couple weeks, give yourself a month. Like you're not the company survived
Yeah.
before your arrival, they'll survive 2 more weeks. It's okay. And you're going to massively increase the probability that you hit the target on your initial shots. And it's amazing how that early start becomes your brand. So a
Yeah.
couple wins early, and you have a steep trajectory. A couple
Yeah.
wild misses early, and now you seem like a
You
new
see, you're
problem
playing
to
catch up.
solve.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit as well in terms of your transition then from corporate into running your own business. You mentioned before, I heard as well, like you made an acquisition and then you kind of grew that business of which you have now, the Management Accelerator. Maybe you could just share a little bit about that and how you kind of transitioned from corporate into your own business and the challenges and the joys that come with all of that.
Well, you just gave a very generous interpretation of of how well that first business went. So we bought an online review site in the education space,
Okay.
and I would say for the first couple months it was good, and then Google changed the algorithm and our traffic got cut in half, and so the site was 100% organic. I scrambled, I figured out SEO, got it to bounce back, and even got it to bounce a little bit higher. And in parallel, was saying to my wife, we need to be diversifying. And I think the next logical place is social media. Hopefully we can just build this brand account and I knew Twitter. That's where I spend all my time scrolling and stalking. I never actually engaged on it. And I'm like, I'm going to go take this course with this guy, Sahil Bloom. And we're 2 minutes into the course, and he's like, if you're here to build a brand account, you're crazy. It's impossible to do unless you have like a world-renowned brand. It's better to build an individual account, and then you can use that following to eventually transfer some authority to your brand. And I remember going downstairs to my wife and being like, apparently I'm going to have to write on the internet under my own name for this to work. And she like laughed at me. She was like, sure, guy who's never commented on anything ever. And we gave it a shot, and a lot of it bombed, I was writing about family and education and kids and business, but the leadership and management posts got a little bit of traction. And so I started to write more of that, and it started to snowball. And then we created our first Management Accelerator program at a point where I only had 3,000 followers on Twitter. And I had hoped a few people would take it and maybe offset the cost of developing the content. And I happened to have a thread on delegation go viral, and we had a wait list of 150 people, sold out the first one before I had ever created a slide. We've been doing it ever since. So it was a fun recovery. By the way, that business that we originally bought has gone down to like nothing. And it's a couple $100 a month. But I don't know. I'm like a slumlord on the digital internet, real estate or something.
It's really interesting in terms of the pivot, like what you mentioned there about, I think that's a big challenge for a lot of people that are either doing things on their own or that are in company where they know that they should be posting because it's good for their personal brand, but it's also good for their own profession and so on. What the thing of when you first told your wife versus when you started to get kind of consistent, what were like kind of some things that you would look at when you were creating content and focusing on that, like with consistency? What were some of the things that you used that were helpful, if you can remember?
Well, I think that I would say, I'd give you one piece of advice that was the breakthrough for me, and then I think there's a relatively simple formula that gives people the 80-20. So the breakthrough for me was, it was actually in that Sawhill course where I can't remember who asked it, but someone was like, how do you get over the imposter syndrome? Like, how do you get comfortable just hitting post? And he said, and it stuck with me. He's like, look, if you post something and it sucks, no one sees it anyways. Like the algorithms don't reward bad content. So you post it, it's no good, no one sees it, life goes on. That's basically the equivalent of not posting. So posting bad and not posting have the same downside. But if you post it and it's good and the algorithms reward it, then you might get to 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people. He's like, so it's truly an asymmetric bet. Almost no downside, unlimited upside. And if you make enough asymmetric bets in your life, you end up winning big. And I was like, with the finance background, I was like, oh yeah, that's what we try to do. And sort of that in some way was releasing. Like I didn't want to look
Yeah.
stupid in front of people. I didn't want to say dumb things, but I didn't even know what
Yeah.
things were good, et cetera. And so that was a big unlock. If I was somebody starting off today and I had no following and I wanted to jump on a new platform, whatever, it's a pretty straightforward formula. Step one, post something every day. Like whether that's video, it's writing, whatever, just force yourself into the habit of like, I'm going to post. They're going to stink. Like your first one's going to be terrible. Your second one's going to be terrible. But if you commit to doing it for 30, 60, 90, half a year, whatever it is, that last one will be 10x better than the first one.
Yeah.
The second thing is skip some steps by going to learn from somebody. So there's lots of courses out there and people might roll their eyes at online courses. It is such a cheat code for like hundreds of bucks. Somebody will show you at least some of the basic things you should do to get there. And it comes with a secondary benefit that I don't think people underscore, which is there's 20, 50, 100 other people taking that course at any point in time who want exactly the same thing you want, which for the purpose of growing an audience on social media, then means you have a group of people who can be mutually beneficial. So when I was growing on Twitter, there were 8 or 9 of us who, of the 200 people who took his course, I would say 10 of us stuck with it for more than a couple months. And we just stayed together. We weren't competitive. Hey, you post, I'll support it. I'll post, you support it.
Yeah.
10 of us got to over 100,000 followers within the year. And
Yeah.
so, post every day, go learn from somebody, find that supportive community to like poke holes, support each other's, with comments, whatever else. And you can get there.
Yeah.
I've seen it now play out. My wife did it on LinkedIn. She's over 100,000 from exactly the same formula.
So the other thing as well, the interesting thing you mentioned as well is like that community sense. If you have people that are trying to have a similar goal and so on, it's kind of there's not an obligation, but there is like you're motivated there in terms of if you're posting and you're encouraging each other, and I guess it doesn't feel so isolating as well then.
No, and it's positive sum, right? Like the bigger my audience gets, if I'm supporting your stuff, then more of my audience sees it, and then you grow. And if you're growing and you're supporting my stuff, then until you grow, I grow, we grow. It's a win-win. Accelerates together. Like no one loses.
Yeah, definitely.
There aren't that many places in business that's true. So it's a pretty nice
definitely.
setup.
I'd love to hear a little bit about Manager Accelerator. Maybe you could just share in terms of, you shared about how you started and so on, but like where are you today? Who you work with? You mentioned as well about a new program that you're launching soon. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about that with us.
Yeah, no problem. So Management Accelerator is an 8-module cohort-based program. So we open it up online. We'll have 50 leaders from often 50 different companies who come together. We're meeting twice a week for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we're building out everyone's sort of tailored leadership system, right? Everything from how can we make you more self-aware to how can you coach and develop your people to how do you set goals and track them with OKRs? How do you give feedback? How do you recruit, et cetera? We've run that on our partner Maven in that public forum, I think now 14 times. Our next one will be in October. A couple things have happened along the way. So we've been doing that, and companies started to call and say, I actually don't want to come to your public program. Can you come in-house and teach it? So when we started, it was the tail end of COVID. That was always remote. Now we often go in-house. So we'll go. We were at a Fortune 50 company last month in-house for a day and a half. I'm going to go work with a scaling startup in the AI space in September. We've got another one in November. So we'll go actually teach these in-house, tailor it around their culture, their problems, their leadership objectives. So that's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened is a lot of those experienced leaders were like, hey, do you have something for my early career managers? Like, do you have people, the managers on my team, what can I send them to? This might be one step too advanced. And so we created a second program called Management Fundamentals. So it's very much the 80-20 skills that I wish people had told me when I had that first management job. And so we do that in a 2-week sprint, both publicly and in-house as well. Yeah, the thing I mentioned is our third new program. We actually are building. Well, so one of the pieces of feedback we get is especially from our global audience, is like, do you have something that's more accessible? financially? Can you have something that's a little bit lower priced? And so we are creating the Management Accelerator community. So it's a membership program. It has lots of written, detailed playbooks and templates. We've created our first short program. So it's a 100-minute, first 100 days managing your new team. We're going to add more to that library, these recorded forms. And then I do group coaching a couple times a month with the community. So if you have a management challenge, you can come in and we'll pick it apart and turn it into a case study and help you break through it. So it's a way to effectively get executive coaching, training, and resources for less than either of our 2 live programs.
Yeah, great. Really interesting. Would you say then, like for the business that you have now then though, content has been kind of the key driver in terms of creating more, growing the business and so on? Or is it now that you've established a brand and you have an authority in the space, does it come through referral, or is it still you're seeing a lot of net new business via the content that you create?
Yeah, so early days it was 100% content. So we don't buy ads. We have a newsletter. It was all people from X or LinkedIn who eventually might get to the newsletter, who might eventually be in one of our programs. It was 100%. The very first one, as I was saying, 100% X. All those people came from Twitter. Now we are up to almost 50% referral. So we have alums sending other alums. We have companies sending multiple waves of their managers and leaders, et cetera. But it's 50% content, 50% referral.
Great. Dave, this was great. I really enjoyed speaking with you. If anyone wants to find you, we'll put the links as well that you mentioned to the programs that you have. Where can people find you?
Yeah.
What platforms, I mean?
I was going to say Twitter and LinkedIn are the
Perfect.
2 easy ones. And then we do have a newsletter. It's the MGMT Playbook. So mgmtplaybook.com or check out davekline.com and you can find all the stuff that we do.
Perfect. We'll put all the links on the show notes as well. Dave, thanks again for talking with us. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.